Hello everyone, and welcome back to another card game tutorial video. In this video we will go over conditions that will cause a player to win or lose the game. In order to do this, we will need to add a few new features. The first is being able to swap a benched Pokemon to the battle position and adding a button to end the turn without attacking. If you enjoyed this series and want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to download these program files, consider checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. The first thing we need to do is fix an issue caused by the last video. Changing where the client connects to the server, we created a small error. When writing the join message in the menu object step event, we should have referenced the client object. In order to do this, we will make the following change. For this video, we will need to create a win and lose variable. These variables need to be initialized in both the player and the opponent object. Since all objects refer back to the player object through a variable called player, in order to prevent a future issue, we will initialize a player variable within the player object. With these new variables, we want to print out when the player wins, loses, or draws. This will be done in the player object draw event. The first condition needs to be the draw condition. If it is not, in the event of a draw, it would tell both players that they both won instead of it being a draw. Now we can create the first win-lose condition. This will be in the player object step event. If the player's number of prize cards equals 0, or if the number of prize cards they can select equal the number of prize cards they have won the game. We want to check this after the player object's alarms 1, 2, and 3 have completed. These alarms are what initialize the game, so we want to make sure the game is initialized before checking for this. If those statements are true, the player has won. In order to make this work properly, we need to track the number of prize cards that have been selected. We can do this by decrementing the prize count after a prize card has been selected. Now, if the player has won, we need to send the outcome to the opponent. We'll do that with a script called script message send outcome. So let's create that script. This script will be sent one of two variables, either a 1 or a 0. A 1 means the player has won, 0 means the player has lost. Now this message will follow the buffer structure as all of the other ones. So the first thing we're going to write to it is the macro for the send outcome message. And then we're going to write to it argument 0. So now let's create the send outcome macro. And now that we have the message and the macro for the send outcome message, now let's create the case in our client handle message script call. And within this case, we're going to create a local variable called outcome, and we're going to set that equal to buffer read buffer u8. And with the opponent object, we're going to do one of two things. If outcome is 1, we are going to set the opponent object's win variable to equal true, and the player object's lose variable equal to true. And if it's not 1, we are going to do the opposite. Now that we have all the code, let's test this. In order to test this easily, we will add a condition to the player object step event that will allow us to increase our prize select variable without having to destroy a Pokemon card. So if we go back to our player object and the step event, we're going to put if the keyboard check released enter button is true, we are going to increment the prize select variable. But before we test it, we need to account for it in the server program. So what we need to do is open up our server object in the create event. We need to create the macro for that message, and in the server handle message script, we need to add this condition right below our coin create case. And that's all we will need to do for the server object. So now let's load these. So now that we have these open, if we start the game, I can increment the number of prize cards I can select by pressing the enter button. So if I pressed it 2 times, it allowed me to select 2. Now if I press it 3 times, it says to select a prize card. But if I press it a 4th time, it should say that I've won and that the opponent has lost. So if I press enter again, it says that I won and that they have lost. But now let's do this at the opponent end. If I hit it 4 times, it now says that it has been a draw. So I wanted it to do it this way because of what one Pokemon does causes both Pokemon on the field to die, in that rare case, it should end in a draw. But we see that this works, so let's move on. The next win-lose condition we will add is when the player does not have a Pokemon card in the battle position or on the bench. If that is the case, the player loses the game. But before we address this, we need to add the code to allow the player to move a Pokemon from the bench to the battle position if there is no Pokemon there. In order to do this, we'll add a new condition in the field card object left down event that will allow the player to freely move the card if no Pokemon is in the battle position. So the new condition will be just like this one. So we're going to copy it and paste it here. But within the if statement, we're going to put player field at position 0 equals 0, and that the card is selected. Then we can move the card. But then we have to make a condition in the field card step event to move the card to the battle position. This will be at the top of the left released event in the step event. So if the player field position at 0 is equal to 0, and the field position that we are hovering over is equal to 0, we want to send a message to the opponent that we are going to swap these positions. And we're going to do that with the position of the card that we are moving to the battle position and the battle position. Then we want to set the field position at 0, the card number equal to the card number of the card in our hand, and then we want to set the field card number at the position that the card is leaving equal to 0, because we are swapping them. And then we want to change the pointer of the field card position at 0 to equal the field card pointer at the position. And then we want the pointer for the field card at the position the card is leaving to equal no one, so that we can set another card there. And then we are going to change the position of the card that is moving to the battle position to equal 0. And we want its new X and Y position to equal the field card coordinate at the new position, and for the Y position. Now, in order for this to work, we need to adjust the condition that moves an unselected card in the field card object step event, which is at the top. This else statement needs to be changed to an else if statement. And that statement will say if the point distance between X and Y and X position and Y position is less than or equal to 10. Then move the card back. Before we continue, we need to update our pause conditions. The first condition will be when an opponent needs to set a Pokemon in the battle position. They should not be able to do anything until they do so. The second will be if the game is over. We will need to add this win-lose condition to the deck object because that object does not get affected by the pause script. So if the player has won or lost, we do not want them to be able to draw a card. Now we can address the last win-lose condition. This will be in the script message turn change script. The first thing we will add is the win-lose condition so that the game cannot continue after it has ended. Then we want to check to see if their field is empty. If it is, and their first turn has passed, that player will lose if there are no other Pokemon on the field. This is how we will do that. We'll create a local variable called temp, and we're going to set that equal to 0. And we're going to use this temp variable to count all of the Pokemon cards on the field. So we'll do that with a for loop. And for every Pokemon that is on the field, we will increment our temp variable. Now, if the turn is greater than 2, which means both players have had their first turn, and the temp variable is equal to 0, that means the player has lost the game. And we need to send this outcome to the opponent. And in order to send a losing outcome, we need to pass it 0. However, if there is no Pokemon in the battle position, but there are other cards on the field, the player must set a card to the battle position before the turn can end. Therefore, we need the following condition. So if we just return, it forces that player to continue their turn until they adjust their field. We also want to make sure that the player set a card in the battle position on their first turn. If they haven't, they will need to before continuing. So if the player turn is less than or equal to 2, and the player field position at 0 is equal to 0, we also want to return. Now, we know that the player can adjust this to make it true because the game mulligans their hand until they start with a basic Pokemon. And when we change the turn, we want to deassert the phases. So we're going to set the player's draw phase equal to false, and the player's field phase equal to false. And lastly, we would like to track the number of turns. So we're going to increment the turn variable by 2 every time the turn changes. So now that we have this, we want to allow the player to change their turn at any time. This will be done in a new object, and we will call this object EndTurn. Its sprite will be the cancel button sprite. All we will need to do for the create event is to create the player variable. Now, we do not want the player to change their turn if it's not their field phase and if they have not drawn a card. So in the draw event, we will have the following condition. Since the object will not be drawn, the player will not be able to left release the mouse on this object. Now, the left released event for this object will be dictated by the pause script. So in the mouse left released event, we'll have the following code. Now, this object will be created in the player object create event above the 5th card on the bench. Now, in order to do this, we'll have the following instance create code. But before we test this, I want to add a destroy event. And if the player object is ever destroyed, I want to destroy the cancel button. So here, I will put instance destroy object EndTurn, and any other object I have created in the create event. The Pokeball object, the deck object, and the discard object. So now let's test this. So if I select continue, we can see that there is no end turn object anywhere, and I wanted it to be printed above the 5th card. So if I select my deck, the end turn object now appears. Now I won't be able to end my turn until I place a card on the field. However, I still won't be able to end the turn because I need a Pokemon in the battlefield position. So now I can move this card from here to this position. And now I can end my turn. And it will do the same for the opponent object. As you can see, I still cannot end the turn until I move a Pokemon to the battle position. But now I can continue, and you can see that the end turn object will be destroyed every time it is not the field phase. But now let's see what happens when I don't have a Pokemon to set on the field. So I'm going to destroy one of these Pokemon until my bench is empty and there's no Pokemon in the battle position. Instead of setting another card down, I will end my turn and you'll see that it will cause the player to lose the game. And Squirtle is doing so much damage because he still has the skill effect of Doduo, and I have not changed that yet. So now I should be able to destroy Chansey, which I did. Now, even though I can select a card on the field, no, I will do that. I'm going to set Poliwag on the field because one of the conditions says if there's no Pokemon here, but there is a Pokemon here, I can't end my turn. I have to wait until I move this card here. But now let's see what happens when I leave this blank, or leave this position empty, and end my turn. The game will think I have no more playable cards. So if I hit cancel, it says I lose and that the opponent has won. But as you can see, I cannot draw a card, I cannot set any card on the field, I can't play an energy card, and if I increment my prize count, or my prize select variable, I can still select a prize card, but that's okay. So that's all I wanted to go over in this video. If you enjoyed this and want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support this series and download these program files, be sure to check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Until next time.